Burgess and Bolton's weekly wrap-up.
Hello, Ben. Oh, you're muted. Hello. I nearly forgot to put my fader up as well. Professionalism, that's what we are. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition. Oh, it sounded a bit like, who's the Radio 2 DJ? Who does the swingometer at the elections?
Yes,
And
Jeremy Vine. You do sound like Jeremy Vine.
Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this week's edition of Burgess and Bolton's weekly wrap-up, where we look at everything to do with the London market, technology, change, innovation. And this week we're focusing on claims because we are in the final countdown to London market claims on the 12th of October, which myself and Ben are taking part in, and Lee Elliston as well, who is on the show later. We caught up with Lee earlier this week, and this is part one of an interview where we are talking about his experience of change and claims in the London market. So before that, we have the news. So Ben, why don't you kick off some stuff around Hiscox legacy inquiries?
So this story has been kicking around for a little while, actually. I've talked to a number of people about it in the reinsurance market, on the broking side and elsewhere, and it started to appear in the press. It also was raised, has been raised a couple of times by Stephen Catlin. He did a Insurer TV interview, worth watching actually, where he talks about the particularly the COVID legacy claims, which he said are very significant. We know they're significant for a lot of carriers. And the insurer has done an analysis in their Reinsurance Week on this, saying that Hiscox is the most exposed to these reinsurance claims. And what is happening, of course, is that the reinsurers are pushing back against this. Stephen Catlin said that these had been effectively the can had been kicked down the road a little, and it can be for a little while by the reinsurance and insurance businesses. Last year, it didn't really appear in the renewals, but there are potentially reserving issues and all sorts of things. Ultimately, this money has to be paid back, and actually, almost the day after Catlin was saying what he was saying, this has appeared. So this is a story talking about that. Actually, they are looking at Hiscox is particularly looking at options now for that legacy business, and I'm sure they won't say it's all to do with COVID. It will be to do with a number of different claims. But this is, fundamentally, it's as I think Stephen Catlin has said, it sort of calls into question the financial strength really of some of these businesses going forward, and you might, of course, think actually with rates going up and all sorts of things that's a good thing. And of course they will say that. And I think they will claim that, don't worry, it'll all be fine. We'll pay it all off through the rates. So there'll be some people sweating on this, I think, within these businesses as to whether this money can be paid back, repaid. But it will have to be repaid. And Hiscox is currently the most exposed on this. So it's a fundamental issue for quite a few players, and worth talking about a bit.
Yeah, I think you're right, and we'll just have to see how this one plays out. And yeah, it's not just we've talked about brand quite a bit in the last few months, but it plays into that, doesn't it? This isn't just a technical financial accounting problem to be solved. It's bigger than that, broader than that. We talked about before on this show. Brand is the sum of many parts, and this type of press is not great when you look at it through those lens.
I suspect this won't. Nobody in the public will see or understand or be affected by this sort of thing. But it all starts to join up after a while. And there's also, I mean, the curiosity of the insurance market, of course, is that these things go into run off. They don't just collapse completely because there is obviously solvency. There's capital there through the solvency regime. However, ultimately, it's a failure. It doesn't matter which way you look at these things or describe them or use nice words. They are, they've overrun in terms of the number of claims they've got versus the policies they underwrote or priced.
Yeah. Let's see how that one works out. Okay, let's move it on. So the other bit of news that you've got is there's a kind of related point really about activist insurers.
Yeah, well, activist investors.
Yes,
investors has been around, and so people who follow the industry will have seen this. And a few years ago, they're always very high profile because that's the aim of the activist investors, is to create stir up trouble really for companies. So there are two good examples in our property and commercial world. The AIG activist investor who pushed a few years ago for the breakup of AIG, which subsequently didn't actually happen. They are still going through their restructuring efforts. More recently was Argo International, which had an activist investor chasing them over the expense accounts of the CEO, who subsequently resigned, and also did the rest of the board. And so that was it didn't at that point lead to a sale of Argo, but there is now another activist investor after Argo. Same thing, and there is a Insurance Insider in full article this week, which is good on this, which says actually probably Argo should hold out for a little while, but ultimately it will have to sell. So this is a feature, and I hadn't particularly understood or got the reason for this, but this article here in the FT about a week ago, I think, was saying that the reason partly for these active investors coming in is that in contrast to what's just been said about legacy and issues there and Hiscox and so on, is that actually these insurers are undervalued in the current environment. This is a much more macro view, if you like, of the industry, much less the kind of insider view, which says that I think on one index they're saying that a lot of these European investors, the European insurers in particular, are very undervalued, about 33% against any kind of index, because for various reasons. And that's part, and some of those reasons are to do with the fact they're institutional, highly regulated. They're not usually the kind of sexy investment companies that people are looking to chuck their money at. But they have become so to some extent. And one of the things which leads into what we're going to be talking about, and maybe they should talk to people like Lee and ourselves are at the coalface about this, is that they do see opportunities or compelling opportunities. There's one chap here says, one of the investors, they have significant value creation potential from structural and operational improvements. They're significantly overcapitalized and should be major beneficiaries when interest rates rise. So they're looking at investment returns in a more inflationary world, I guess. They're looking at structural and operational improvements, which, as we talk about a lot, are often a long time coming and may not happen. So there's a lot of, I suppose, opinion and views about whether insurers are good or bad investments at the moment. And it's quite a mixed picture, but it's an interesting one in that insurance is definitely in the crosshairs of a lot of people looking at it as to its future.
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't that? Especially with the conversations that we have because I work not just in the London market, but also in kind of GI as well. And I think they would, even though we would probably consider them further ahead in some of the stuff that we talk about, customer engagement, delivering the promise, thinking perhaps differently about how insurance might work. I still think there's quite a big jump from those GI insurers into those brands that really do meet and exceed customer expectations.
Mm.
And I think when I have conversations with them, I think they recognize that, and then it comes back to quite a lot of the legacy around their operations that you were just talking about, Ben, about how do they bridge that gap. They can kind of see where they would like to be. It needs significant investment, not just in one area, but across the piece. One of the problems is it's so siloed still, so they don't have this this ability to move data around the organization, get it to the front line. That, hence the reason why you're quite often inputting data that you've just given to a call center representative a moment ago, and all those types of issues and problems. So I recognize that opportunity. What I then question is whether there are the skills, capabilities, willingness, and investment to actually get over the challenges to realize those benefits. But,
that's true, and I think the problem partly is that is the cycle itself, because legacy is such a big issue for insurance, and it comes from either very large unforeseen risks that the insurers didn't price in, or from systemic risks, which of course COVID is a fantastically good recent example of, which is a risk that all happens at the same time. And so you've got it's a funny old industry, because it always has this. I mean, it used to be, obviously in the old days on the Lloyd's account, it used to be a 3-year accounting period, because it moves up and down so much. And you're always looking at these businesses going, well, on the one hand, this is a good thing that they've done all this and they look really successful. And the other hand, look at that horrible, great black hole in the accounts somewhere. Or, what's going to happen in future. And that's, in a way, what makes it a really interesting industry. It also slows it down at some points. But when you come back to all of this, it makes it incredibly difficult to foresee it's always impossible to predict anything, as we know, but it's very, very difficult in the insurance industry, to see what will happen. But it's still quite slow moving. These things, seem to rumble on for years and years. And they reckon that the legacy stuff for COVID could last 10 years, right?
Yeah. Hey, well, we'll keep an eye on that. That's interesting. Thanks, Ben. Right, I have just as a kind of segue into our interview with Lee, I just spotted this in Insurance Insider. So PPL Saga, a microcosm of the challenges in London market modernisation, and it's a pretty good piece actually. It just kind of reflects on where we are with PPL, and I'm not going to go into the detail of that. You can read the article yourself. But I think the interesting thing for us is this idea that it just exposes the complexities of the subscription market and actually getting change to happen. And it's something that Lee Ellison talks about quite a lot, this difference between modernisation and transformation. And quite often, and I think I can safely say with the Blueprint 2, there was a transformation aim and objective. But once you start to get into the detail of how you're going to deliver that, and there are questions and marks about whether they've actually gone into the detail of it, but you suddenly start saying, well, actually, this is more modernization than transformation. And then you start to go, well, do you really need these small incremental steps? Because basically, everything's working okay. And so the conversations tends to drift. And I just thought it was a timely article. I think it came through on Wednesday. So yeah, I just thought I'd pick it up as a kind of teeing up our conversation with Lee.
Yeah, fascinating question about the brokers, isn't it? And the big three brokers and the power they wield. That's been brought up by Instech London have talked about that, and we all talk about it. And there's no real clear, simple answer to that question, I don't believe. But yeah, if the brokers decide to move, then things will change.
They will. So let's introduce Lee. So as I said at the top of the show, we spoke to Lee Elliston, who's the claims director at the LMA, in the build-up to London Market Claims on the 12th of October, just to get a feeling from him about the modernisation agenda, how he feels it's going. And then we talked a little bit around kind of the culture of the London market and why change is quite difficult. So let's play the interview and then we'll come back. So, hello, Lee, and welcome to Burgess & Bolton's weekly wrap-up. Delighted you could come on the show this week, especially as we're building up to London Market Claims, a real-world event in a couple of weeks' time. I just thought we'd start our conversation just by asking you about sort of the modernisation agenda. You're deeply involved in that side of things and got a obviously keen interest in it. So just kind of how do you feel the progress has been, not especially over the last 18 months with COVID? How do you feel about that?
I think, Jeremy, that the impact of the pandemic shone a light on the market's ability to respond in a digital and remote way. So I do think the market should probably pat themselves on the back for being able to respond to claims in a very electronic environment. And I think that the claims community responded very well to that. We had processes in place, we had technology in place from how we've dealt with ECF, the IMR, and even things like single claims agreement. We were able to pull on those processes that had been established pre the pandemic, and we were able to show how useful they were for handling claims, removing touch points in the process, and dealing with claims volume. So I think there's a good pat on the back and a good story from that perspective.
Yeah.
And I think London's done well, Lee. I mean, I think compared with other markets we've looked at in the research, London has done pretty well, actually, and I think I'd say some of that's down to the kind of ecosystem, and it's a cohesive market. If you look at places like the US, for example, it's just appalling. So it could always be worse elsewhere, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, I think one of the reasons it's worked so well is because everyone did know exactly what their roles were and their jobs, and they knew each other personally. So when you took those relationships and you took them online, you didn't leave those relationships at the door of your office or living room or whatever. You took them with you and you understood how people worked and transacted. So I think that was a real strength. So just looking forward at the modernisation agenda and kind of how it's changed as well over the last 18 months. Do you think, how happy are you with the progress of it? Do you think it's deep enough, fast enough? What's your feeling about that?
So I think a few things have occurred. I think people have accessed and utilised different technologies throughout the pandemic in a professional or a personal sense. In a professional sense, we've had new technologies thrust upon us that we've used, and they're now BAU. We use a lot of them every day. I think that's shone a light on how legacy some of our technology is, even though it's been in place to support how we have operated within the pandemic. I think it's shone a bit of a light on it's not that modern in its infrastructure, and it's not that user friendly. Whether you're a user or you're looking to provide benefits for the customer, policyholder, or client. I also think that the modernisation journey or the transformation journey, whichever one it is, like it can be different every day of the week. The reason I think it's different every day of the week is when Blueprint 2 got published, it was very much a transformational journey. And the ambitions were very transformational. I think much like many change projects that you go on, it starts to move back from transformation and starts to turn into modernisation, which is going to be a bit of a challenge, probably for Lloyd's in the market going into 2022 and 2023. I also think, particularly from a technical claims perspective, people decided to double down on claims and not look beyond just servicing the policyholder and the client, and particularly around some of the complexities that were coming out of the COVID-19 BI issues that we've seen. And I think that was the right approach. Did people have to double down on providing a claims service? Absolutely. That's what we're here to do. We're here to service our policyholders, pay claims fairly and quickly in the most transparent way that we can. So absolutely right to do that. I do fear though that in doubling down on claims, we are now looking at any claims change through a modernisation lens, and I think what that turns into is, how do you re-platform a platform that we've already got today, or how do you re-platform a process that we've got today? And all that really does is replicate existing processes. It doesn't transform anything. It replicates existing touch points that we've got between brokers, TPAs, cover holders and carriers. And it will just re-platform a piece of legacy technology that we've got embedded in our marketplace. Yeah. If that's the best that we get in 2022 and 2023 as part of this journey, I think that we will have failed as a market. So do I think we need to hit the reset button now before we move into a place that might not get the right outcomes? Yeah, I think we should reset now.
So when you talk about that, Lee, I think it's really interesting. I was talking at a technology conference this week, and all through that, I was thinking, what bit of this is people and what bit of this is technology? And do people really understand what they're talking about when they're talking about either of those things, but particularly talking about technology? And there's a guy out in the US, actually, a guy called Brian Falchuk, who you may have come across. He does the future of insurance stuff, but he wrote a really interesting piece, very simple piece, saying, if we're truly about the customer, then, you know, if a customer files notification of a loss or a claim with a broker, doesn't that slow the system down? And I thought that was quite a good question in a sense, because it's a simple question and it takes it from the other end, from the customer lens, but it plays into this idea that it could all be different, which was all very nice. But then I was saying to Jeremy that I read underneath the article all the comments from brokers who were saying, what a ridiculous notion. And it's yet again, you know, agents and brokers getting the blame for everything and carriers trying to go direct. So I just wonder how much of this is technology and how much of this is, you know, the forces of resistance to almost any kind of sensible idea, simple ideas that you know, that people might put forward.
I think it's much less about technology now compared to pre the pandemic.
Right.
I think pre the pandemic, everyone was going InsurTech crazy, and everybody wanted a new app or a new piece of technology and wanted to show how it could be utilised in their business. I think now it's much more about the business model rather than the operating model. So how is business being distributed through the supply chain? How is business being transacted through that supply chain? And looking at it through the lens of the customer or the client. I think if you look at it in that way, what you would do is change market practice and change process. Does it mean that people would be disintermediated in the process? I'm not really sure that it does mean that. It just means that different activities are being done in different places. And if the broker still has a role, which they will still have a role, are they more focused on adding value to the customer and the client in matching the capacity between the cover holder and the carrier? Are they adding more value with regards to resolving complex claims issues rather than processing and rekeying the claim data? So all I think it does is refocuses the role of the broker or the carrier, and it focuses it more on how are they adding value to the customer and the experience and the service that they receive. I think if you get that piece looked at and optimized, and you get the data standards and the quality of data in the right place, then I think all you're doing then is choosing which technologies and apps can integrate or overlay with the process and the data that you've got.
Yeah, I'd agree with that.
I think
that I was going to say, I was wondering, I think there's some players I've started to work with who are talking a little bit differently or very differently, saying we want to move away from the transactional into a true understanding of the customer. And I think that's an interesting mindset change from some of the newer players coming into the market. So I don't know, I mean, the question will be, do you think that's going to change much? I don't know the answer to that, but I think it's interesting when you see people talking like that, because the conversation is actually very, very different from the one I've had probably for the last 15 years about claims. And I even found myself saying, oh, but wouldn't you do this? And they said, no, not if we have this mindset. We don't do it that way, you know. I just wonder how change is going to come about, I guess, is my sort of question. It sometimes comes from surprising directions, not from blueprints.
Yeah, true. I think a lot of the change will come about from competition, if I'm being honest.
Yeah.
So when you see people like Convex come into the market and really start to establish themselves in a non-Lloyd's environment, when you see people like Carbon come into the market, you see other carriers moving into the Lloyd's space that haven't got the legacy challenges that some of the other carriers have. I think they've got the ability to look at it very differently. They've got the ability to look at it through the lens of client and customer. They've got the ability to step back and say, well, can we get the data right, and can we get it right from the get-go without any migration issues or legacy issues? So I think those carriers that can get it right quicker because they haven't got those legacy issues will drive the change and where that change needs to happen across the marketplace. Because I think they'll be doing business very differently. I think they'll have a very different expense ratio because of it. And I think they'll have very different service and customer outcomes because of it as well.
And the other thing I think that comes out of it as well is, and that's back to the Falchuk point made earlier on and the comments underneath his article, which is about this kind of collaboration, because it seems to me that if you can get, because ultimately, you know, in London, the broker is still is proxy, the client for most of the businesses in particular. It's going to be that way in a wholesale market, I guess, for a long time. But it does seem if you change that conversation a bit, then that collaboration becomes easier. In other words, let's not have the same old conversation we've had for the last how many years and talk about something different. That might change things. Softer stuff, isn't it?
Yeah.
We were talking as well just before we came on just about the delegated authority space, and you'd seen a kind of a shift in the mindset there away from a big bang approach to tackling those legacy issues and process issues that you were just talking about there, to actually kind of look at, let's just try and get one element of it working and then try and learn from that. I think that's what you were saying.
Yeah, I've definitely started to see people be a bit more innovative in their approach to a new product with a particular cover holder and a particular broker. And in that regard, I think people are being a bit bolder around what the business model is. So is the broker needed in the same way they've traditionally been needed? No, but they're still part of the deal and they're still part of the transaction. It's just about when do they get some oversight of the product and the portfolio, and do they need to be rekeying and processing in the same way? And I think people have looked at that as almost a pilot or a proof of concept to say, well, for this product with this cover holder and this broker, can I use technology and data in a very different way? And does it drive a different business model as part of it? And I think the quick answer people are getting is yes, it does. And if we can prove that, can we scale it across how we've operated and distributed business within that kind of delegated model? And I think that's a better approach for me. I think it's an easier way to get buy-in to change because you're delivering something that's tangible. People can see what you're doing. They don't see ghoulies by the fact that you're talking about change in a business model. They can feel that they're still involved in the process. They're still involved in the deal or the transaction. They're not being disintermediated. It's just a different way of doing things. And I also feel as though you can start to get internal buy-in around the change because you're doing it on a more iterative basis. We've historically seen, whether it's at a market level or within certain businesses, people are looking at how do we redesign our operating model? And that's going to cost 20 million over 5 years, and we're probably going to overpromise and underdeliver and go over budget and have a consultant that we're probably half pleased with when it comes to delivery. So I think the approach that people are taking is very different now, which I think the pandemic has actually pushed.
That's really interesting because I was running a DA kind of breakfast briefing this week, and they were certainly having that conversation rather than looking at the big end-to-end transformation. Let's just take the little pieces. One interesting thing that was said actually in that meeting was that they would look at, let's say, the 80-20 rule. So 80% of this of our business here, let's just try and get a process that would work for this 80%, and let's forget about the 20%. But quite often, people in the teams or whatever would focus immediately on the 20%, the stuff that was, it would never work in that system and process because, that piece of business that I did 5 years ago, it would get kicked out or something. And it was quite interesting. I think in this market, there seems to be, we seem to jump to that 20%. What are the blockers here? It wouldn't work because, that piece of, firstly, do you agree with that just as a sentiment? And do you think that has changed? Have organizations and people recognize that and are putting things in place to go, no, let's forget about the 20, let's concentrate on the 80, get it right. And then, as you were saying, iterate the change and scale it.
I wouldn't say that there's been a mindset shift. I think traditionally the market has been great at trying to articulate why we can't do things and why things will never work. And it's disappointing because the best thing about the marketplace is the people. The people make the marketplace. They give Lloyd's and the Lloyd's market and the London market its USP because it's the knowledge, the experience, the level of collaboration, the relationships that we've got, and how that all, turns into how we deliver products and respond to products and deliver service and do it in quite a bespoke way in some quite complex and challenging scenarios. But whilst those people give the market its USP, they're people that don't really have a mindset around trying things that are new, shaping things differently, and allowing things to almost develop and deliver when they're not quite ready. And we don't live in a perfect world. So why should we live in this perfect world of delivering change or transformation when everything's got to line up and be 10 out of 10 and ready for every single user that might access it on day one? So I think there needs to be a big mindset shift in the market. I don't think that's just a claims issue. I think it's just a market issue. Do I think that comes from the skills and capabilities that we've got in our marketplace? Absolutely. I say that because I don't believe that we've got diverse enough skills. I think we need to be swelling the market with skills and mindsets that come from different backgrounds and industries. And I think if you put that together with the strength of the insurance knowledge and skill set that we've got, then you take the mindset and the capability level of our people in the market to a different place. But we've got to want to attract different skills, and we've got to want to attract different people. And that comes from organisations wanting to do things differently.
It's always a pleasure to talk to you, Lee, that your passion for this stuff comes through in spades. So I can't wait to meet you at the conference so we can carry on the conversation. But thanks ever so much for coming on today.
Thanks,
really appreciate the time, Ben, Jeremy. Thank you as always, and look forward to the conference, and testament to you guys for sticking with it and having an in-person event. The networking and collaboration that we need to get back into the market is critical for the market's future, and having events like yours will just support that.
Yeah.
Great. See you there. Thanks a lot.
Cheers, Lee.
Good, that, wasn't it?
Yeah, it's very good. Always good, Lee. Nice and clear.
Yeah.
Doesn't mince his words.
No, not at all. It was really interesting when he started off by just saying, we need to shift away from the operating model and look more at the business model. And as soon as you start to think like that, then you start to think about, okay, yeah, let's think of it through a customer lens. Let's look at these processes. Are they really delivering the outcomes for the customer and client? And it's great. We spoke to him. That's the second time I listened to it. And it's just so refreshing. It's so good.
It is, and the point is that, and we keep coming back to this, and a lot of people who've been on this show have come to the same conclusion, all from different places in the market, I think, which is that the customer, which is obvious, and also that you can't just look at things through the operating lens, because that is only one part of the story. You've got to build out. I think his point about talent and capability is really interesting, is that it's just not diverse enough. And I think he means by that we need more what one of my clients calls the emotional quotient in the market, less of the technical mindset. So yeah, I can't disagree with that. I suppose it's a bit, or very disappointing in a way, that it's all been so slow, and even he at the centre of it says it's so slow. But I think next week he'll talk a bit more about some of the things that we can start to think about doing that make a difference. And it's really this difference between top down, or the balance between top down and bottom up, really. The point about competition is really well made. I mean, we've gone on about that enough, but it is important. And if you don't have real competition in markets, there's whatever people think of competition or capitalism or whatever else, I think it does actually work, and it works to get people thinking and on edge about what they should do, not just sitting back.
Yeah, definitely. And we pick up those themes next week in part 2 of the interview, where we talk to Lee more specifically about claims, the claims community and their appetite for transformation. And then, as you were just saying there, Ben, kind of how we're gonna move this thing forward. So that is really good. Okay, super. So what are you doing this weekend, Ben?
Well, it was my birthday this week, and I'm going out. Thank you. I'm going out for a bit belatedly, because I was speaking at a conference on my birthday. I'm going out for because that's the way I roll. I'm going out for dinner tonight with my wife. Just me and my wife, no kids. So it'd be very nice. Looking forward to it.
I thought you'd be glued to the golf.
I am a golf. I am going to watch the golf. Yes, I think that'll be good. I'll be watching the Ryder Cup. Yeah, I think we might not. Well, no, actually, there you go. So there's the thing about, kind of operational capability. The US team has got better operational capability on paper, but we've got more spirit and teamwork. Yeah. I think we'll win because of that, as we always do.
I'm not a massive golf fan. In fact, I don't like the game, but it was interesting. I did listen to the build-up last night on 5 Live, and you've very succinctly put into 30 seconds basically how they strung out 3 or 4 hours of commentary and build up. But that's exactly how they presented it. That okay, the Europeans don't have the best team on paper, but the way that they put the teams together is just so much more effective. And the example of it was, and I think this is where they take turns hitting the same ball essentially. So if you're I think it was a lady golfer, I can't remember who she was, but she was essentially saying if you've got a mate and you're playing that game, you don't have to say sorry because you just go, you know, and you go, I know you were trying your best. I can see you trying. I'm not going to give you a hard time. Whereas the Americans, they look at all the stats and then they go, okay, these two guys, they're together, and of course, you then have to then build the relationship to.
Well, and often they start by because they're all very individualistic, and it's part of the culture of the US golf game. So Koepka and DeChambeau, two of the bigger. They can't stand each other, right? And they interviewed, I think it was DeChambeau this morning, and saying, and he just gave this very blank answer of, well, we've had dinner together, as if that answered that we're friends, really, and we'll get on and we'll have a team spirit. I mean, that's a really good example of where you don't even have to read between the lines. You can tell that that's not going to work. So, yeah, you're right. So the poor old team captain now has to keep the two best players apart, for sure, and used to be this, when Tiger Woods used to play, as good a player as he is, he wasn't a team player. So, and it's, I see the same thing in claims teams, underwriting teams. One or two people can bring it together, or break it apart. And we'll see this weekend. I think they'll really struggle this year, the Americans, because as soon as any pressure's put onto teams like that, they all start blaming one another.
I think my only other analogy between the golf and perhaps claims and claims transformation is the leadership as well. So if you look at the leadership in the US team, you have quite not a weak leader, but he's a different style of. He's not your typical American brash, come on, shouting. However, he's got 2 deputies under him, who's Mickelson and another big ego, who are those. And so he's not only going to manage his team, he's got to make sure that the message that he's saying from the top is actually then distributed in the right way through his deputy team leaders or whatever they call them. And I just think that's you can see that mismatch, and it's almost like when you put a team together and you go, this is imbalanced, and it comes back to Lee's point about diversity of thought and opinion and putting a team together in the round. And having those open conversations.
I ran some analysis a few years ago of all the projects that we've done with claims teams, and it was clear that when you looked at the descriptors and the feedback and the comments from teams, that before they start to do well, they're very individualistic, and therefore anything that goes wrong, they fear being blamed. And this is just about human nature. If that's what your culture is, that's what it's like. And so if you fear being blamed, you tend to blame other people or, to deflect it. And that happened, that happened within teams, but it also happened when we showed research to them. If they weren't doing very well, it was nothing to do with me. It was some other part. And if we said, well, that class of business in which you work is doing really well, they would completely, utterly ignore everything else and take the credit for that. So it's very, very typical behavior. But once you bring teams together, they get each other's back, they work for each other, they take pride in that, they enjoy that. It just becomes very natural. And it's, it's kind of obvious, but it's not easy to achieve it if you don't start with it.
Yeah. Interesting stuff. Good. Right. Excellent. Thanks for tuning in, everybody. We will be back next week, same time, with part 2 of the Lee Ellison interview. So enjoy the weekend. We'll see you next week.
Cheers, everybody.